Can anybody hear me okay?
I can hear you. Heather and Dr. Calvin, if you'd like me to do call to order.
Good.
Kathleen Allen, Tom Chapa,
Here.
Heather Del Conte,
Here.
Pamela Dowd,
Here.
Lisa Glidden,
Here.
James McKenzie,
Here.
Linda Serino,
Here.
Zeta Olson.
Here.
At this time, I believe the board would like to move to executive session for matters which will imperil the public safety if disclosed. Could I have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? You may move to executive session. So if you would log off to this link and go to my invitation that is entitled Executive Session. Thank you. Hi, Amy and Craig. You should have a link or an invitation from me entitled Executive Session. If you could join that, please. Linda, are you with me, Linda? Did you find it, Craig? Craig? Can you hear me, Craig? Dr. Calvin, can
Yes.
you unmute Kathleen Allen? I cannot do it from my end.
Sure, let me check to see. Is she the 315 number?
Nope, she's on the side there.
Yep, she says no, it's her computer. She just
Oh,
said it was her
okay,
computer. But she wanted you to know that she is here, so when you do the roll call, she's here.
okay. Okay, I believe we have everybody. If I could have a motion to adjourn executive session.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, we actually already did that.
Oh,
Jim
great.
was a first and Lisa was a second at 5:57.
Thank you. Could I have a motion to move to regular session?
I'll make the motion.
Second,
I'll second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next will be the superintendent's report with Dr. Calvin.
Good evening, board. Great to see everybody back again. And we're ready to go. And so we're going to get going right into our presentation. Okay, go right ahead and turn to the next page there. Is it, I believe, Matt, I believe? Okay, great. Or Eric, I'm sorry, my apologies. All right, so just a couple highlights from our district. In terms of our entry plan, we're continuing to move through the entry plan. We're almost done. This week, we've met with the band boosters group last week, and also for tomorrow, we have another meeting with our parent group. We've met with all of our parent groups from all of our schools. It's been really great to learn from our parents. For the rest of this week and beginning of next week, we'll be meeting with staff. And then I'm excited because I get to the final piece, which is really important, and that's getting voice from our students. So I'm looking forward to meeting with our kids from all of our schools who are interested in coming on and meeting me. And then, board, I'll be bringing you a report of everything that I've learned, and I'll be sharing themes, and then I'll also be sharing recommendations based on the entry plan. So let me just say it's been a pleasure to sit down and to learn and to hear from our entire community. We've had over 400 people who've been a part of this, quite a few, and it's just been great to listen and to learn and to help with informing decision making for the future. Our students, just so that we're clear, board, as you know, we have put in a temporary piece where we all of our schools to go remote, and that is up until December 14th, and that is really because of the rise in our COVID cases and concerns around student health and safety and staff health and safety. Certainly, we are working with our parents. I want to thank all of our parents who have really been so supportive and really been understanding for the most part. And please know, again, our goal is to be back by December 14th. Of course, it's contingent upon how things go with our pandemic. We're going to really work hard and doing everything we can to get our kids back. We know that we like to have kids in person for learning to the greatest extent possible. So I just wanted to share that date. I want to let you know that also we're continuing to move forward with our planning for the middle school. Again, the return of our kids is going to be based on the pandemic and how things go. But in the near future, at our next board meeting, I hope to come back with some additional details for the board so that we can kind of discuss how we're going to move forward. We're going to be certainly reaching out and having discussions with our teachers, our staff, our instructional and non-instructional staff as we continue to plan towards returning the middle school students next and then our high school students. Okay, Eric, go right ahead to the next slide. I want to share that there have been some updates in terms of the yellow zone piece. So we are continuing to hear about concerns around being designated as a yellow zone district. If you're watching the COVID-19 numbers, certainly our rate has been higher than the rate that the governor has quantified as places that would need to go yellow zone. We know that they are doing the designations based on zip codes and clusters, so we're not really sure where things are headed in terms of what the governor is going to do and if and when he'll designate us, but we're certainly preparing just in case. I want to let you know that we are working now with Dr. Morgan and Oswego Health around yellow zone requirements. So the major requirement is if a district becomes classified as a yellow zone, that they have to basically put in 20% worth of testing. They have to test 20% of their random group of students and staff, and that needs to be done until we get a result that's lowered than what is in the region, the area, but also lower than what the threshold is, which is 3.5%. We are in discussions now with Oswego Health. We're talking about setting up yellow zone testing if we get to that point, and we're thinking about, just so the board knows, working with Oswego Health. They will pretty much conduct a test for us. And then as they conduct the test, we're thinking about doing like a drive up kind of setup, and we're not sure exactly where. We have some ideas as to where we might do that. We're not certain yet, so we'll come back and talk with the board a little bit more about that. But Oswego House has told us that they can actually do the testing for us. We have a contract with them already to do a lot of our medical work. We haven't had to use them to a great extent this year, except for consulting with. So we know that we have quite a bit left on that contract that we could use towards this. What that will require, if we do have to do testing, is about 200 kids would have to be 200 folks between our staff and our students would have to be tested. And so they would come in, get a test, and then we get those results. Information would also have to be downloaded into the state's Eclair system, which actually gets basically directed to the health department, and they can assist with making sure that all contact tracing and activities such as that are done. So Dr. Morgan and his team are right now gathering additional information. This is very new for all districts. You know, when we first started this conversation, you know, there was a lot of discussion around really schools not doing a lot of testing, but many schools have been evolving as we're moving forward. And we, I guess, are one of those groups that are starting to really look at this. How might we do this if we need to do this? And why? Well, it's really about our kids. We really want to have our kids here to the greatest extent that we can. And if it's possible to bring kids back and to move through the yellow zone testing requirements, then we're going to do everything that we possibly can to do that. I will tell you that thus far from what we're seeing across the media is that, you know, when people are getting their schools tested, the results are coming back lowered than what, you know, they're seeing in the region. So we're open to the idea. And board, before we kind of move forward with what we're going to do, I will come back and I will share more details with you. Are there any questions about the yellow zone update I just provided, board? Everybody okay? All right, go ahead, Eric. I want to tell you that also with respect to health, we're doing something a little bit different than what we thought we would be doing for sure, but all districts now are assisting. So at our last board meeting, we had some folks on, we had Diane Oldenburg on from the Department of Health, who talked a little bit about the quarantining process. Well, since she has been here, the county has reached out to all school districts in the region and shared that there are some challenges around contact tracing, that cases have risen so quickly and so rapidly that they're having some challenges around getting a hold of people and trying to really help them with the contact tracing piece. So schools have been asked to assist with notification of district staff and students. Basically, if we hear of someone who has contracted the virus and are positive, then what they're asking us to do, there's a script that we would read that tells them basically that they would need to quarantine and that the health department will be in touch with them, and that the health department is responsible for quarantining them, not us, basically. So there's a script that we're reading, but the reason is basically we can get a hold of the parents quicker. The health departments are really, in some cases, it's taking them anywhere from 3 to 10 days to get a hold of people because of the high numbers of cases that we see that's happening. You know, basically, if we hear of something, we're letting our parents know, our staff know, basically that they need to be quarantined. The health department will be in touch with them. And again, that the quarantine is not coming from us, but it's coming from the health department. And then we fill out a form and send it to the health department, and they basically will contact parents as soon as they can. Parents should know that because of the overload, that now what's happening is that they are getting calls are now coming. Many calls are not coming for contact tracing, are not coming from the local health department, but instead are coming from a state site. So there's now people from up in Albany, from New York City, from all over who are part of this contact tracing group, and they're reaching out all over the state to let people know and to work through the investigation. So some of our parents may get calls from people who are not from local, and they may ask questions and they're just trying to clarify because they're not locally. And for some parents, they've already experienced some of this, and it's been a little bit of a surprise. Like, who are these people calling? And it's just because basically they're there to partner because the county's having some challenges around it. So I just wanted to kind of share that so that people knew what was happening. Are there any questions around that at all, board? And again, I just want to clarify for those who are watching, we are not putting people into quarantine. That's a process that's working through the health department. We are letting you know once we find out, or here's the letter that we're reading to you, but the health department technically is the group that's putting you in quarantine, and that will release you from that as well. Okay, Eric. All right, just want to let you know, board, we are moving through with our administrative budget portion. In terms of budget builders, we have some meetings that will be coming up very shortly. We'll be bringing information back to the board. And what are those meetings? So we're looking at administrative costs around district clerk, things that the Board of Ed might need as well, the superintendent's office, finances, auditing cost for the treasurer, tax collector, purchasing cost, the fiscal agent, and then legal cost. In addition, we'll be working with Heidi around personnel to figure out what those costs would be looking like for the next year. Security costs, Nancy will certainly be working with that group. The warehouse costs, so we'll be talking to Dave Cristofelli. Postage, what might we anticipate for postage for next year? Technology costs, and we'll be talking with Jamie about that, and then insurance and dues, assessments, and BOCES costs. So in our next get together with you, board, we'll be bringing back a number of pieces from this as a part of the budget builders updates for the board to review and to talk through. Okay. All right, Eric. All right. Also wanted to share that Tom and I took a tour last week, and we're going to be offering more tours in the future as we kind of move forward. We kind of just took a tour of a number of places. We toured Layton, the stadium, and the high school to just kind of see some of the progress that's happening with our capital improvement piece. More progress is occurring. We got more work still left to do, but certainly progress is occurring across the board with the capital project. Go ahead, Eric. Just to let you know what's happening in Layton, we've been working on door hardware removals and replacement. We've also started work on the new AD office. We've installed benches in the locker rooms, and then we're working on completing the referee rooms now at Layton. In the middle school, they're finalizing boiler room flue piping. Startup of the boilers 4 and 6 has actually occurred, will be occurring. Actually, I think that just occurred today, if I remember correctly. And then we'll be restarting boilers 2 and 3 as we kind of move through the rest of this week. Power transfer on last Friday was completed as well at the middle school. At the high school, we've installed sound panels in the orchestra room. Looks really great. It really does. The chorus room panels are also complete. We'll show you pictures of that in just a moment. We've been completing ceiling tile installations throughout the area there, finishing floors and starting finishes now in the band room. The epoxy flooring is being installed in the locker room area now, and the final painting is ongoing throughout the building as well. Go ahead, Eric. The concession building duct work has started, and the installation is occurring in the mezzanine area. We're preparing for finishes right now and installing water heaters and piping in medical rooms, preparing for gas turns also now by National Grid. We're also working on metal panel sidings. 90% of that has already been complete. You can kind of see that as you kind of go around the buildings there. And then we're working on final electrical connections to the equipment as well. With the team locker rooms, we're currently working on water heaters and mechanical rooms and preparing for gas turn-ons by National Grid. And we're also working on final electrical connections to equipment, and the metal roofing and siding remain to be installed with the team locker rooms. And just to let the board know in terms of phase 3 with the middle school. So we're certainly working now on a number of things with respect to the middle school, the redesign of it. And so we've had a number of feedback sessions and idea sessions, and we've gotten some great feedback from the staff there around future, what the school kind of needs to look like in the future. And then I will share with the board that in this Friday's weekly messages you get, I'll share with you the themes that we heard from the staff so that you can see what things that staff where we're currently at and where they'd like to go in the near future. And then also as we kind of move forward, we're going to be bringing back some concept maps. So the architects now have heard some things from our staff, and they'll start to put together some concept maps and things that we kind of want to see with things that we want to see in the middle school as it will be revised. And also, so the board knows, we are now preparing to do some virtual and or in-person tours. We've got a couple districts that have had some great work done in it, and we'd like to take staff out or do virtual tours with them so that they can see it and also help to generate some ideas and some thought around the future for the middle school. So I just wanted to kind of share that information with you all. So Tom, you took the tour. Any thoughts? I certainly hate to catch you off guard, but any other thoughts that you might have about the work that you're able to see at all?
No, I mean, you covered it pretty much, but it looks really great, and particularly in the high school, the orchestra room and the band room and stuff, and the acoustic treatments in there are really great, and everything that's happening. The entryway over at Layton is really very nice with the ceiling tiles done, executed and kind of carved in. It's very nice. So the whole project is coming along very nicely. So I think that's all I have to add.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. Okay, Eric, go ahead. And then in terms of the capital project, here's some pictures. So you can see the chorus room over there with the panels going on the walls. You can see some of the work that's happening out that was occurring in the main hallways. A lot of this work has actually kind of been progressing since we took the pictures even just a day or so ago. Okay, and you can see some of the ceiling work also going into the chorus room as well. Okay, go ahead, Eric. And then some additional pictures of the tiles, or excuse me, of the ceiling work, and also the panels, and also some of the ceiling work that's happening in the band room that's being done at this point in time. Okay. All right, Eric, thank you. All right, any questions about the capital project before we move on tonight? Okay, board. All right, so this evening we have several guests who are on with us tonight from King and King, and also Mr. Bucko is on with us, Tom Bucko, our general counsel. And then from Ferrara Ferranza, we have Colleen Hemrich, who's on with us as well, who is our special counsel. And I've asked them all on because we have a concern that has come to our attention that I'd like to share with the board this evening. I'll go ahead, Eric. All right. So what is that concern? So while doing work on the project on an area on Turl Street, we found our architects and our folks who are working in those areas found some stained soils, which were discovered approximately about 4 feet below the existing grade, the street level of Turl Street, where the old Wilbur field was. The soils were tested by our environmental engineers and was found to contain some metal contaminants that really were of concern to the group that was working in the area, and also to myself concerning. The contaminants that we found after doing some testing had a couple of things in it: lead, arsenic, barium, and mercury of various concentrations at several locations in the field. Eric, go ahead, please. And this area is really in the former Wilbur field. Craig, you want to just talk a little bit about those soils and that was found there on Wilbur field, the former Wilbur field, please?
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Oh, great. Yeah, so a little background. This area is being developed into 2 practice fields, but it's at a lower elevation than the previous Wilbur field was. And the reason for that is part of the project involves redevelopment of the campus floodplain, which is a federal FEMA floodplain designation for this area. The reason we're doing that is with the stadium development, we actually raised the elevation around that corner from Utica Street to Buck Boulevard. And we had to kind of compensate for the volume that we lost by increasing the volume or lowering the grade in this area of Wilbur Field. If you go to the next slide. So this image kind of tells you what we found. This is over by Turl Street. It basically runs parallel to Turl. And initially it was, I'd say about 1,000 square foot of discolored material that we discovered. It was approximately 4 feet below grade. It's the first time we encountered it was at 4 feet below grade. And whenever you're doing excavation work, anything like that, anything unusual kind of stands out. You're in my business, you're concerned about the volatile type of content that could be in there, such as gas or oil, materials that might be a suspect from an old gas station or something like that. So we did have our environmental engineering firm, Barton LaJudas, come out and sample and test the material. Good news is it was negative for the volatiles. It was not, there were no significant discoveries of anything gas or oil or petroleum-based found. But what was noticed was it had elevated levels and concentrations of metals, such as lead, primarily, barium, arsenic, and mercury. Kind of things that are suspect of fly ash or the ash material residue from old steam plants, coal-fired steam plants. So at some point, this material was used in this area, probably as fill to bring up the grade or a possible dump site. But we were concerned that we look at this material, test it, and then we started to discuss options and how we needed to manage or remediate this. With that, if you want to turn to the next slide, I'll turn it over to Scott Nostrand, our lead engineer with Barton & Judas.
Good evening. So yeah, my team was brought in to do some initial profiling of the stained soils. And as Craig and Dr. Mathis has said, you know, we did identify some elevations of a few metals in the soil, and also some semi-volatile organic compounds, which are basically remnants you find in soot and diesel exhausts, things like that. The levels that we see here are higher than you would like to see for a parkland or an athletic field, but probably are in the range of what you would see typically for commercial and industrial sites. So we looked at where these were located in relation to the visible staining, and then started to think about solutions for how to address this. That brought up the question of, well, what do we have at the perimeter of the stained areas? And if you move to the next slide, we ended up doing a sampling program that started on the northern end of the old Wilbur field, which is where the contaminants and the stained soil was initially observed, and did a series of samples and borings down across the majority of the field. And what we found is that there is a varying level of metals, mainly, that show up in different locations on the field. Some of the areas, the yellow area in the middle, has a lot lower levels than the red does, and the highest levels we see up on that northern hatched green area. What we have seen is that, you know, as Craig had indicated, these seem like they're associated with an ash fill layer or maybe old building debris. It's hard to know exactly what the source might be, but it was way down below the original surface of the old football field. And so this figure here shows you a couple profiles of the site. The one on the left is what the original conditions were at Wilbur Field. So you had stained ashy soils down 4 feet below the surface of the grass field. And then they had to bring that top 4 feet off of the site for the floodplain and stormwater program. And when these were exposed, we are looking at solutions to how to move forward with this project. And one of the options is to essentially remove enough of the soil that's contaminated so that we can place a 2-foot soil cover on the field, and then be able to put in the practice fields that are in the original plan here. Next slide, please.
Okay, so the question was, how did we learn about this concern? As I previously mentioned, it was in the development of the floodplain. We discovered that area to the north by Turtle Street on June 1st, and we had the material tested immediately, and we proceeded with additional testing as we started to do perimeters to kind of isolate and find where the extent of this material is and the concentration levels that it is. We've been still continuing to do additional testing in some of the areas that we've already outlined as within the perimeter or within the boundaries, to kind of determine, you know, how to best handle it. There might be some areas of non-contaminated material that we don't have to treat, that we don't have to manage the same as we do the contaminated materials, and that would be savings down the road that we wouldn't have to incur costs of. But we started looking at options and budget development, and we're still doing that today. We have the city of Oswego on board with us, reviewing options of, as they are the agency responsible for the floodplain permit, to see how we can possibly achieve what is required by the floodplain design and also minimize the cost or the incursion of this material. We've also met with the state education department twice. This is in person, or what I call virtual meetings we've had with them. We've had discussions with them via email, bringing them on board, making them aware of the findings, and really they've been very helpful as far as trying to look at potential ways to help support the process. We'll have future meetings, I'm sure, as we develop more information for them to consider. And then we've, again, throughout the whole process since June, have had discussions with our regional DEC office and the approaches that we're taking and suggestions and recommendations of it. They've been very helpful as well. Next slide.
So, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at a solution to solve this problem of using a soil cover technique to provide us a safe cover above any remaining contaminants in the lower level soils. And this is a remedial technique that we've discussed with the DEC. It's one of DEC's standard remediation processes for sites where you have to remove contaminated soils. And so what we're going to do within the constraints of the floodplain design is remove 18 to 24 inches of contaminated soils and then place clean soil back in. As I said earlier, some of the levels of soils vary, and so some of them may require treatment with a bonding agent so that they don't leach out of a landfill, because ultimately these soils have to be taken to a controlled landfill. And most likely this would be the county landfill. The soil cover system will be a combination of clean fill that will be tested before it's brought onto the site. And then the top 6 inches would consist of a normal base layer and topsoil to support a sod field surface. So, from the surface of the playing field down to the end of our excavation would be 2 feet or 24 inches. It could mean that there is still some locations that have contaminants below that depth, but they're not in contact with anybody that would be using the fields. And as I said earlier, we're following DEC standard protocols for remediation. Next slide, please.
Okay, so where we are today, we have secured the entire perimeter of the site with chain link fencing so that no people from the public or students or anybody can randomly walk across that area. We walk that fencing at least once a day, if not twice, early in the morning when we get on site, and then typically just before we leave in the afternoon. As Scott and Craig have said, the city of Oswego has been notified about this issue, as well as the Oswego Fire Department and the Oswego City Police Department. And we have gotten notice out to the Oswego County Sheriff's Department, because what we're asking them to do from the law enforcement side is just to make sure during the nighttime when we're not out there that the site stays secure. And the reason why we walked with the fire department is just to make sure that they were aware of the situation in case somebody got hurt and they had to go out there, at least that they were familiar with what we have out there. As Scott said and Craig said, we are doing additional testing. We've done our 3rd sampling of the water runoff that we have there from the site. And we'll look at testing the other fields as we move forward in the future phases. Next slide, please.
Thank you. So where are we now? I'll touch a little bit on the SED side. We've reached out to them, as I mentioned earlier. We've had 2 meetings with them. Currently, they are working at a higher management level in reviewing this project with the Division of Budget and some of the other management offices in the state ed building. And we're going to hopefully have another follow-up meeting with them within the next week or so we can proceed with the next steps of getting a project reviewed by them and hopefully moving forward to the bid process.
And we've also been speaking with the local Department of Environmental Conservation. Once we realized that we had these elevated metals, and basically are looking to see whether the department had a funding program or a remedial program that the site needed to be entered into. The guidance we've received back from the department is that there's not a good program that really meets the needs of what this is, and that it can be handled during construction as long as we follow their typical process. So at this point, they basically agreed that if we follow this process of the soil cover that I've been describing, remove the materials that are in our way, be able to complete the design to the elevations that it's set to, but that there's a separation of 2 feet between the new practice fields and any of the subsoils, that meets the remedial standards. Next slide, please.
So where we are right now with
Corey, we're having a hard time hearing you, Corey. Maybe if you come closer to the mic there.
Okay. So Corey, I'll fill in for you. Basically, we've been working with the city of Oswego. We've met with the mayor and council, as well as the engineer, head engineer, regarding the work we've done for the floodplain design. They've been very supportive in what's been done to date, and appreciated being brought into the discussion. Again, like Peter mentioned, they've been very collaborative, supporting us with the fire department and the police chief to just make them aware of what's going on. And they're also, again, willing to enter into discussions about the floodplain permit and seeing what we can do to minimize disturbance of this. Don't have to remediate as much as we currently have planned, which has been very helpful. So we really appreciate what the city has been doing to support us through this. Did I pretty much capture everything, Corey? You can give me a thumbs up.
Yeah, can you guys hear me now?
Hey, yeah.
Yes, as Craig said, the city's been very supportive. We've had a couple meetings with the city engineer, who's also the local floodplain administrator. They're working with us on a couple different things with regards to, the quantity and stuff like that. So we're working with them as much as we can to minimize the cost, but still meet the overall requirements that both the city and FEMA ultimately have. Sorry if I recapped everything, but
No, it's perfect.
Before we
It's good
go
to hear
on,
your voice.
Craig, before we go on, we have a board member that had a question. Linda?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe we just, okay, go ahead. I just saw a hand raised. My apologies.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So the next slide, if you would. So cost implications. Peter's going to fill in the detail side of this, but just as an overview, we've estimated out that the project value of this, which includes all the testing and design work that's going to be associated with this, as well as the removal of the material, is approximately $5.6 million, kind of a not to exceed value of that. But Peter, you want to talk a little bit about how we derived the costs and the work that went into kind of getting there? I think you're muted, sir.
The actual work that's going to be done to remove and remediate the soils, what we did is we took Scott's design along with a material that can be mixed with the current existing soils that are contaminated. And we estimated the square footage of the area that's got to be remediated. And we came up with a little over 24,000 cubic yards of fill that needs to be remediated and or removed from the site in order to maintain the current design of the floodplain. We also sat with our site contractor and put costs together on a daily basis of how many days it would take him and how much equipment he would have out on site to treat this material and remove it. We also called the company that would typically provide the material that you mix in with the contaminated soils to bind it. We got unit costs for that, and that was applied as well. Once we put all those together, we sat with Barton LaJudas, with Pell Osborne, and just put their cost of design together and putting documents together will pass SED's review, pass DEC's review, so that we can get that out to bid to the contractors. And that's how we've derived the costs.
Mhm. Okay. Next slide.
Okay, board. So we've shared a couple of things. We have a bunch more to keep going. We have a couple of questions and answers that we'd like to share with you. So we had anticipated that our community may have some questions. We wanted to be able to share facts, questions, and answers. And so we kind of want to just go through that for a moment. But before we do, are there any questions from the board before we move through that piece? Heather, go right ahead.
I just had a quick question about the fence. Is the city okay with the fact that it's the way the fence is oriented, it really takes up the entire sidewalk, so people really can't get through, like with a wheelchair or anything like that? Is the city aware of that, and are they okay with it?
The city has walked the fence, Heather. They have not made any comments to me. I can specifically, I guess, ask the question, but there are some areas of that sidewalk that are really not conducive for a wheelchair anyhow. But I can specifically ask that question if you'd like.
You don't have to. I just wondered if they had just okayed it is all. We didn't want any
The day that
and
when the city engineer Jeff Hinderleiter came out along with the fire chief, we walked the perimeter with them, and neither one of them had any comments about the fencing and what we had secured.
okay, thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, all right. So we're going to go through now some of the questions and the facts and the answers that we have. We have a document that we'll be putting out to our public, and these are those facts, questions, and answers from that document. Go right ahead, please, Eric. All right.
Great. So when was the issue discovered? Well, as we previously mentioned, it was during the development of the floodplain area, which was getting into fast pace around June, early June. And it was located 3 to 4 feet below grade at this location by Turtle Street. It was approximately 4 feet. It's kind of why we weren't too concerned with any issues with exposure, because it was so deep in the ground. It was well beyond what DEC would require a safe barrier between that material and between the field use. The field is being developed for the floodplain, which is what we're trying to minimize the excavation of with the city. And again, we continue to work on a way to minimize the cost of this. So there's been many already renditions of design modifications and discussions to try to work on those things. And we will keep the board, the district, the board, and the community aware of those through future meetings as we develop them. Next slide.
So in terms of the next question, I know that there'll be some wondering, what are the materials that have been found in the ground? Scott, you want to talk to that again? I know we've talked about it a little bit, but share a little bit more.
Yes. All right. So like I said earlier, we profiled the soils, and what we found is elevated metals and semi-volatile organic compounds that are raised above typical background levels. The metals really are limited to lead and barium, mercury, and
Arsenic.
Arsenic, yes, thank you. And then the semi-volatile organic compounds, there's a few of those compounds that are a little bit elevated over background. And as I said earlier, those are compounds that typically originate from soot, from diesel emissions. I can find them anywhere I sample in a city, typically. Based on what we see at the site, these compounds that show up in the analysis, it looks like this could be a source from like a coal ash, burned building debris, just general old industrial fill. We suspect it was likely placed on this site in the mid part of last century. So it's been there for a long time. In fact, ever since the school was built, it's been there. And so they're nuisance contaminants that we need to deal with because we don't want them exposed at the surface.
Great. Thank you. Now, I'm sure some people again are going to ask, where are these materials located? And we talked about the old Lobo fill. Craig, you want to share some more on that?
Yeah, well, we initially discovered that material in a concentrated form over by Turtle Street as we were hitting those lower elevations of grade. It was as we started to develop what we call boundaries to see the extent of this that we discovered that it actually at different concentrations goes all the way from Turtle Street to Buck Boulevard in that whole field that is or was the previous Wilbur Field area. Various concentrations, again, some from elevated levels that we're trying to remediate through the proposed process to levels where, either non-existent or minimal where it can just be handled as standard fill material on a project. So.
Okay. All right, Eric, go right ahead. Okay, so I'm sure that there will be some folks out there who wonder, who is the school district reported this issue to, and what agencies oversee the removal and the proper disposal of these materials. So Scott, if you want to talk a little bit about that. Again?
Yeah, so, once we identified the issue, we talked with the contacts at the Department of Environmental Conservation in the region. Oswego is part of Region 7 of DEC. So these are our remediation engineers out of Syracuse. And we discussed what we'd found, the levels that we'd found. And as I said earlier, they provided advice as to whether or not they had any funding or the programs that would be good to bring this site into. And they basically indicated it looks like a construction problem. If you follow these standard techniques, you should be able to deal with it as part of your construction.
Thank you, Scott. And Scott, I got really 3 more questions for you that all really deal with health risk. So I'm certain that we'll have some folks concerned about what are the health risks, if any, that are associated with these materials. And then I'm sure we'll have questions about the runoff from the site. Has that runoff been tested? And then my 3rd question for you is, what assurances are there that the surrounding groundwater has not been affected? So if you want to just go through those 3 questions for us, please.
Sure. So health risks. So the metals are the more riskier contaminants because they can have more immediate effects if people ingest them or inhale soils with certain metals like lead. I think many people are familiar with lead as a household contaminant in paint, etc. Very similar in this situation. You don't want to be ingesting or inhaling lead soils for long periods of time. So that's why we're trying to keep a barrier between soils or remove them from our way. The semi-volatile organic compounds are a completely different class of materials and have a very long and you have to have a very long time exposure to these materials to have health effects. If you touch it, it's not going to hurt you. You certainly don't want to be eating it either. So the same technique that we're using for the metals works for the semi-volatile compounds, in that if we can remove soils and put a clean barrier in place, then there won't be an exposure to anyone at the school. Next slide, please. We have been out testing runoff from the site that is coming into some of the stormwater control structures that have been constructed so far. And this is an attempt to make sure that we have an understanding of whether these contaminants that are now exposed directly to precipitation are not going anywhere. We don't expect them to, because metals and semi-volatile organic compounds are typically bound to soil particles. They don't move by themselves. They move when soil moves. So we have taken samples from these storm drains and not found elevations of these contaminants in that water, and we will continue to do so. In addition, the site has erosion and sediment controls in place as part of the construction project, so that limits any movement of the soils themselves during a larger rain event at this time. Next slide, please. And as I said in the last slide, the groundwater itself, we don't expect that to be of concern because these contaminants are soil bound and they don't really leach from soil under normal environmental conditions. But again, this is why those controls for the erosion and sediment control are in place, and why we're trying to remove the higher level of contaminants that are now exposed.
Great.
Next slide.
So, Peter, just wondering if you can share with us about the turf. So I know that we have a new field out now, and a lot of people are going by and driving by that new field. And some may ask the question, are there any of these materials under the turf field? Can you just talk a little bit about that for us?
Yes, sir, I can. We did use some of the materials that were on the top of 1 or 2 foot of Wilbur Field to bring over to raise up the elevation of our new turf field. However, a majority of that field was then topped in with new soils or new stones. I think it's type 4 stone that was brought in to structurally raise the entire field area, including the parking lot. So the top portion that we stripped off of from the old Wilbur Field, we observed absolutely no staining whatsoever, no issues in contacting any of the ashy materials that we're seeing down at these lower levels. So I'm fairly well convinced that nothing's over there. To top that off is, even if there was something brought over there, which I seriously doubt there was, the amount of fill that we brought in, clean fill, to put on top of that exceeds the 2 foot of cover that we would be doing on the Wilbur Field for the remediation program. So there's no way that anybody could come in contact with any materials that might have been brought over.
Thank you, Peter.
Yes, sir.
Eric, you can go ahead. So, Craig, can you just share a little bit about why the contaminated soils were not found before the construction began?
Well, I can tell you that during the during design, pre-construction, we did do geotechnical probing of this area. When you do that, we're basically doing bores or holes or cores of the ground to kind of determine the structural capability of the soil, the makeup of the soil, as well as, you locate the water table and any other types of information that would help us in the engineering and design of the fields or buildings that may have gone on it. The reports in this area did not show any suspect material or any notification that there was anything of question. There was nothing. Valto noted, usually they do a sniffer test to make sure, but there was nothing found. So there was really no reason to do further investigation more than that. We did find that when we reached that 4 foot level that there was a larger area, and that was really what prompted us to investigate that further. So it was an unknown condition, and it was unfortunate that it wasn't discovered earlier, but it is something that is common when you're trying to do a site and you get into those types of levels of material removals. Just to note, though, as a proactive measure, knowing that we've encountered this material on the campus, all the other adjacent areas for future work, future development, will have a higher level of testing and sampling done to confirm and validate whether this material exists and where it exists. That will also guide some of the design decisions that are made in the future.
Okay, right. Corey, can you talk a little bit about the floodplain being relocated to an area not affected by the contaminated? Can you talk a bit through that question for me?
Sure can. So one of the things that had been pointed out before was, is there a way with the floodplain area, is there a way that we could relocate it elsewhere? And unfortunately, the floodplain area needs to start in the lowest part of the site. And as everyone knows, kind of where those roads all come together. You've got different watersheds all combining, and that is the lowest part of the site. And it's not like a wetland system. It had been asked before. Some may have heard that if you're disturbing a wetland, you can recreate it somewhere else at a different ratio of what was disturbed. Unfortunately, floodplains don't work like wetlands. Floodplains are serving a specific site, specific area, and it's not like a habitat area. It's to help offset flooding controls. So you can't relocate it elsewhere. You need to basically accommodate that volume for the area that it's impacting, which is why it was kind of determined that it needs to be located in that area. So we've been able to manipulate topography to work with, the areas down there to allow that drainage and that volume control. And that, if we were to look at elsewhere, unfortunately, we would have had to have looked at contiguous properties, and the school doesn't own anything. So it would have been like, okay, are we looking at acquiring properties or acquiring permits to be able to do it at a different site? So that's kind of why we couldn't relocate the floodplain, and unfortunately, we're kind of locked into the location of where it needs to be.
Great. Thank you, Corey. Scott, I know you went over a little bit, quite a bit about the remediation of the site. Can you go over just some additional details around that, please?
Sure. So the remediation technique that we're following is essentially called a source removal. So we found an area of soil that has impacts that we don't want exposed at the surface. So they're being removed down to an elevation that allows us to place a 2-foot soil cover back in place. The soil cover is a terminology that DEC uses for essentially like a landfill cap, if you think of it that way. But it's a 2-foot cover preventing a barrier to anything that remains below that. And all those soils that are removed during the source removal project will be appropriately handled and disposed of at a permitted landfill. And at the end of the project, we'll provide the district with documentation of what left the site, what remains at the site, and some protocols and procedures should they have to, in the future, have a utility contractor go in and fix a pipe that might be below the soil. They'll understand that there's material below a certain depth, and there'll be a protocol on how to handle that.
All right, thank you. Peter, can we just talk again a little bit about cost for the remediation? I know we shared already the 5.6 million there, not to exceed that amount, but you want to just share a little bit more around that for us?
You're muted, sir.
Gotta unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There we go.
Sorry about that. Not sure how much more I can get into depth, but we did do a detailed analysis of the amount of soils that needed to be either remediated and or removed. We also reached out to various contractors to get unit prices so that we could put this cost together. We shared it with the engineers to make sure that we weren't missing anything. We also included their costs for monitoring, testing, the fencing to secure the area, the the storm sewer protection systems that we put in place around some of the manholes that are out there. And that's how we came to the cost, by putting all those aspects together.
All right, thank you. And then we have district consultants who are preparing bid documents. You want to talk a little bit about that, Peter?
Yes, each of the consultants, Barton LaJudas, Appel Osborne, are putting together a program that can be put together so that we can issue it out to the various contractors that are going to be willing to bid this work. We want to make sure that it is detailed enough so that they encompass all of their costs, so that we cannot be hit with change orders later on down the road. And then we're also trying to make sure that it is a competitive bid. And by that, I mean that everybody's pricing up the same quantities, the same type of materials, so that we're looking at an apples to apples comparison. We're not giving them the opportunity to come in with their suggestions on how it should be done. We're dictating to them what should be done, and we're putting that document together. Once those documents are put out to bid, we'll give the contractors a period of time to issue their bids. They'll be publicly opened, and the lowest responsible bidder will be awarded the project.
Thank you, Peter. So Nancy, Craig, and Peter, if we can just talk about two more questions. One is who's going to pay for the remediation cost, and then when will we expect the work to be completed?
Okay. The remediation costs for this are going to be part of the current capital project funding source. We're working with state ed to see how that will be implemented and approved. Some of the requirements will require the district to take some actions. But other than that, that's how we're looking to approach the funding for this.
We've also worked with bond counsel to make sure that the remediation falls within the scope of the voter-approved site work project.
Great. Okay, you can go right ahead to the next slide, Eric. Okay, and then the work being completed, when do we expect the work to be completed? Peter and Craig, maybe?
Once we get the documents together and out to bid, we're expecting the bid time to take approximately a week. Once we get the bids in and we determine the low responsible bidder, approximately 2 weeks later, we should be able to start work. And the actual construction work itself, from the time that we're released, will take approximately 8 weeks. We think it can be done in 6, but depending on the weather and being able to haul off, that we're gonna have to watch that. The other thing that we're gonna have to watch is based off of the remediation system that we're doing, the Oswego County landfill will only take 800 cubic yards of material a day. So if you have a good contractor out there, they could probably be hauling off that site, remediating and hauling off that site twice that amount. So we may have to slow down on some days because the landfill will not take any more at a point. So we're giving you a ballpark of 8 weeks at this point.
Thank you. So our district has a long appreciation for and a respect for and recognition of apprenticeship programs. We just wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about that so it's clear out in the public in terms of whether the school district is going to, can you keep, oh, can you go to the next slide, Eric, and then we'll come back to that one? There we go. Can we just talk a little bit about our apprenticeship program piece there, and will the school district waive the apprenticeship program? At this time, we're looking to do so to get the emergency work done. Maybe Colleen, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So at this time, we're recommending the waiver of the requirement for the apprenticeship agreements for the different contractors. The board has authority to do that. The rationale is, for this particular case, to increase the competition between the different contractors that will submit bid and minimize the cost. It just opens up the project for more competitive bidding. And again, any contractor that is already in the apprenticeship program can also, of course, submit a bid, but it does give the board an opportunity to consider more bids and at a more competitive price.
Okay. All right, Eric, maybe go to the one, please, on is the area safe in the meantime? So Peter, I know you've talked a little bit about the fencing, but just wanted to go over that again about the safety of the area.
Yes, I mean, we fenced off the entire area. Any of the materials, we had some block staged right to the side of that area. We've removed all of the materials that were partially on that portion that was exposed. The area that we're sitting in now with our trailers and where some of the cars are parking is on top of a stone fill that was taken off or the actual asphalt from the track itself. We did not dig anywhere down in that area. So everything has been contained now just to our staging area where the trailers are. And most of the materials, if we've not needed, has been removed from the site. Excess block, any of those things we don't need anymore, so they've been removed. So therefore, we've reduced our footprint with regards to the construction area.
Great. Thank you, Peter. 2 slides over, Eric. So in terms of the impact on the school district's capital project, maybe we'll have Nancy and Craig. Can you talk a little bit about that for me?
Go ahead, Nancy, if you want to kick it off.
So the district is going to use our existing voter-approved capital bond proceeds to pay for the project. Knowing this, it may have an impact on future phases. I know that the architects and construction manager and everyone involved will look very closely at costs going forward for future phases to minimize any effect on those phases. And as we go forward, the district and Board of Education will evaluate those phases to make sure that there's no impact on programmatic and educational information that goes forward.
And again, the remediation of the existing capital fund could come from there's a portion that could come from the unassigned general fund balance and or the New York State building aid piece as well. And certainly each of those areas are listed just in case we kind of need to go through, use whatever source we would have to fund this piece basically. You want to talk a little bit about the use of the funds, impacting scopes, the scopes, the source of, can you go back for a moment? Impacting the scope of the work plan for phase 4 and 5. Craig, can you talk a little bit about that again for us?
Sure. So we're basically capped for the whole capital project, the 2018 capital project at 63.1 million. That was the voter authorization for that project. Now you're taking into what we'll say a worst case scenario hit of 5.6 million that was not designated as part of that 63.1 million. So it just goes to say, as we create budgets for home, it's if there's a bust in some area, it's got to come from another area. And we will conservatively be working with the district and the board to reevaluate basically the phase 4 and 5 scopes of work, which is primarily site work on the campus that is scheduled 5 and 10 years out from now, and reprioritizing and refocusing on that. It does not necessarily mean that that work won't be performed, but it is good fiscal stewardship to make sure that you're doing your due diligence to manage the monies you have and to make sure that you don't exceed that 63.1 cap that the voters were good enough to support last year or a year or two.
Okay, thank you. So Colleen, we have one last piece of information that we'd like to go over and then take questions from the board members. And that piece really, Eric, can you go to the next slide, please? That piece deals with the CEQA, the emergency project resolution that we're going to talk through tonight with the board. And then both of these things, by the way, are in our resolution. It'll be coming in just a moment after the board has questions answered. Can you just talk a little bit about the CEQA and also the emergency local project resolution, please, if you could?
Sure. So when school districts are encountered with situations like this that endanger the health and safety of students or property and require immediate remediation, there is a vehicle in the educational law that allows for approvals of emergency projects. So this is how this project is being submitted to State Education Department. State Education Department has agreed with that assessment and will be provided with a separate project number. As a result of that, the board needs to adopt a resolution identifying the project as an emergency project. Part of that resolution has a couple of parts. First part is a State Environmental Quality Review Act assessment and opinion. Because it's an emergency project, it's known as a type 2 action under that regulation, and that's set forth in the resolution. The second part is of the board agreeing with the declaration that this is an emergency project and approving the expenditure of the maximum amount that's set forth in the resolution for that from the funding sources that were identified in the previous slide. All of that needs to be done tonight, we're requesting, and then submitted to State Education Department so that the State Education Department can approve it and the district can start to move forward with the projects, sending out the project documents, sending out for bids for the projects for the work to get going.
All right. Okay, board. So you've heard our whole presentation and our frequently asked questions information that certainly we'll be putting out to our community. I just wanted to now open the floor for any questions that you might have. And Eric, if you can go 2 slides forward. Any questions from the board tonight concerning information that has been presented? Anything that you'd like for us to clarify or answer for any of you all this evening? Okay, well then I just want to share with the board, Eric, if you can go back 1 slide. that after our meeting, I want to let you know that we certainly want to make sure that we share this information with our public. We have a number of items that we will be putting out over this week. The first one involved, and some of next week as well, we'll be putting out a PR release this evening to the media to make sure that everyone who may not be a part of this meeting will know a little bit more about it through the media. We have the FQ&A document that will be on to our website after this meeting this evening. There is actually a section on our webpage that people can go to, and they can find information about this. The questions and answers that we've just gone over with you will be up there. There is a letter for parents, for staff in the community that will be going out tonight and tomorrow. And then forthcoming here in the near future is a media discussion from folks who are on here this evening. And during that video, we'll just answer questions. We'll answer the questions that might be frequently asked by our community in video, so people can kind of go to the site and be able to watch the video and see questions and answers presented in the video. So we just wanted to share all of those things will be there. Our goal is to be transparent, to make sure that our community understands what's happening, why it's happening, and then how we plan to resolve the matter. Are there any questions at all from the board? And Eric, you can go to the next video, next piece there. Are we good? Okay, board. So I think that the last piece there is just the resolution, and Karen has that resolution for the board for this evening. All right. Well, with that said, I'm all done this evening. Thank you very much. She does have the resolution there for the board.
Okay. I will now read the resolution for tonight, ordinary contingent expense resolution. Whereas during construction on the former Wilbur Field in June 2020, an area of visible stained soils was uncovered as the field elevation was being lowered to create a stormwater management floodplain in accordance with stormwater permits approved by the city of Oswego. And whereas the district officials directed its environmental engineers to review and sample the stained soils, which identified elevated levels of metals and semi-volatile compounds in the soil. The metals identified were lead, barium, mercury, and arsenic. The stained area exhibits areas of ash and slag, and it is assumed that the deposition of coal ash had been uncovered. And whereas the project architect King & King and its environmental engineers has determined and advised the Board of Education that the stained soils must be removed and replaced on the site with new soils in accordance with the remedial design, which is compliant with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation Department's approved remedial process in order to preserve the health, safety of students, staff, and district property. And whereas the district officials and its construction team have been in contact with New York State Education Department Office of Facility Planning, which has agreed that the emergency remedial work constitute a local emergency project work, which is required in order to preserve the health and safety of students and staff, and for the protection of school district's property, and shall receive New York State building aid over a 15-year period. And whereas the school officials and construction team have notified the city of Oswego officials and engineer who have issued the floodplain permit for the project of the discovery of the materials, necessity for removal and replacement of the stained soils, and shall work to perform the emergency remedial work prior to the spring snow melt. And whereas the school officials are seeking to minimize the expense of the emergency remedial work and to reduce the impact on the scope of the $63 million capital project, and therefore the board is considering waiving the apprenticeship program requirement adopted by the board in a May 5th, 2009 board resolution. And whereas the architect and legal counsel have advised that the scope of the emergency project is a type 2 action requiring no further review under the State Environmental Quality Review Act. Now therefore be it resolved as follows. 1, the emergency remedial work is a type 2 action under the regulations of the State Environmental Quality Review Act requiring no further review. 2, the Board of Education hereby declares that the emergency remedial work is a local emergency project necessary to preserve the health and safety of students and staff, and for the protection of the school district's property, and that the project is an ordinary contingent expense. 3, the board hereby authorized the expenditure of up to a maximum amount not to exceed $5,600,000, which is the maximum estimated amount to complete the emergency remedial work as determined by the architect and the construction manager. The funding source for this project will be from the proceeds of the borrowings pursuant to the bond resolution approved by the Board of Education on October 16, 2018, and approved by the voters on December 18, 2018, and or unassigned general fund balance and or New York State building aid. 4, the superintendent, officers, and employees of the district are hereby authorized and directed to obtain competitive pricing to minimize the expense for the emergency remedial work and take all steps reasonably necessary and appropriate to complete the project work, to carry out the intent of the resolution, to apply for any eligible state building aid or other available funding, and to investigate the possible sources to recover the mediation costs. 5, in an effort to minimize the costs, increase competition during the bidding of the emergency remedial work project, the board hereby waives the requirement that contractors and subcontractors have apprentice agreements as required by Labor Law Section 816B in the Board of Education resolution adopted May 5th, 2009. For the emergency remedial work project, the architect and the construction manager are directed to make clear to all bidders in the bid document that the board has waived the apprentice program requirement for the emergency remedial work project. 6, this resolution shall take effective immediately. At this time, I'll ask for a roll call. Kathleen Allen.
Whoa, that hasn't been moved yet.
Oh, sorry.
Heather,
We need to make a motion on it first.
Yeah, motion, please.
I'll make the motion.
Actually,
Second.
Karen, she's saying, hang on for a moment. I think Heather was
Sure.
trying to hold on for a moment. Heather, are you on mute there?
Yeah, I couldn't get done, but he's right. That's all I was trying to get, was that we have to do a motion.
All right.
And second, order to discuss.
Right. Could I have a second, please?
No, I'll second.
Any discussion?
I think we have a lot of discussion.
Hey,
I'm just saying.
who wants to start? Jim, you want to start on your questions?
I don't know if I have questions, but
Jim?
oh my God, this whole thing just makes me sick. So just to be clear for the public, I don't even know how to even word it. We're hoping to cover it out of what our budget is for the capital project. But if we can't, we're going to have to budget for this, correct?
Yes, that is correct, Pam. Our goal is to try to really, where we possibly can, take it from the capital project, the funds that are already budgeted for. But certainly in the resolution, you saw there was some flexibility. If we have to go certainly from our general fund and or state aid, certainly we can kind of go from those areas as well. But certainly we're going to try wherever we can to get everything we can from out of our future phases. Nancy, Craig, did you want to add to that question too? Great question. Thank you, Pam.
No, you're spot on. That's what's going to have to happen.
but can I just clarify? We have enough money in the capital budget to pay for the whole project. We may have to cut things from the capital project, or there may have to use contingencies, but there is no requirement to go into the general fund to pay for this.
Right.
Correct.
That's correct. Yes. And we're going to do everything we can to stay away from that general fund. And before we go there, we'll come and talk with the board way in advance to make sure that that's very transparent and hear from the board and kind of go from there. But we're going to do everything we can, as I said, to try to go from those future phases and try to start in those areas. Okay. That's the goal.
So if I can follow up with that, please. Since we're not required to go from the general fund, what is the reason to include the general fund in the statement?
Sure. So Craig and Colleen, do you want to share a little bit about that, please? Good. And Nancy?
So the authorization for the project, also the bigger, larger project, authorized the borrowing, use from general funds, and other aid available. And this is consistent with that authorization at the same time. And it gives the board that flexibility. Again, you only have that one pool of money, that $62,000 that was authorized, that we're working with for the entire project. So the goal is, correct, Jim, is that you're going to be using it from that. But it does provide the authorization for the board to use the general funds, depending on that aid flow and when those that funding source comes in. It gives that board the flexibility during the course of the project to fund this portion.
Okay, so if I may bring up two things, and one may need an audio visual. Hopefully, maybe we can do it. The first aspect is based on the contingency funds that we have bonded to date. So the amount of money that we have could cover some of the initial funds going into the project, and we could bond against future aspects of it. So please correct me if I'm wrong in that. That's still correct.
I'm not sure I'm following. I'm not
Well,
sure
so
I'm following, Jim.
So, well, actually, maybe I'll do this as a two-part, as a first question.
Okay.
We have contingency money that is currently bonded, that we currently have what we can spend.
Correct.
We could use that as part of the good faith to the state. We're serious about this project.
So yes, as part of that 63.1 authorization, there are contingencies and allowances built into that, as well as escalation, because this project goes out for 5, 10, 15 years, that are apportioned to those various phases depending where they're at. The end all is still, you would have to evaluate how that affects the scope of the work as the project progresses. But definitely it would stay within that boundary of that 63.1 authorization, which you already have built in some of those funding sources.
Okay, so at least personally, the way I'm looking at this is this can be paid for within the capital project. And because this came about because of the capital project, in my mind, it's part of the capital project. So the second thing is, am I able to share my screen by any chance, or do I have to read off something if I'm going to share it? Maybe I can put it in the chat. Part of my problem with the way the resolution is written is based on the original capital project resolution that included the general fund. And I think the board should really see that. So can I share my screen, or do I have to read it to everybody?
I think it would be better because we weren't prepared for that. Can you just read it out loud, Jim?
Yeah, sure. I can read it. And I point out, and I apologize, I did not realize this until after this meeting started to look into this. And so, I will read this for anybody who's interested. This is the 2000, actually, let me go to the official name. This is the bond resolution dated October 16th, 2008. And it's a resolution authorizing the renovations and improvement of certain school district buildings and facilities by the city school district of the city of Oswego County, New York, at a maximum estimated cost of $63,100,000, and authorizing the issuance of $57,200,000 serial bonds to pay the cost thereof. So in section 7, and I apologize again, I only thought of this after the meeting started, but I think it is pertinent. In section 7, it reads, a reasonably expected source of funds to be used to initially pay for the expenditures authorized in section 1 of this resolution shall be from the school district's general fund. It is intended that the school board shall then reimburse expenditures from the general fund with the proceeds of the bonds and bond anticipation notes authorized by this resolution, and that the interest payable of the bonds and any bond anticipation notes issued in the participation of the bonds shall be excludable from the gross income of federal income tax purposes. This resolution is intended to constitute the declaration of the school district's financial intent within the meaning of Treasury Regulation Section 1.150-2 to reimburse the expenditures authorized by this resolution with the proceeds of the bonds and the bond anticipation notes authorized herein, other than the specified in this resolution. No monies are reasonably expected to be received, allocated on a long-term basis, or otherwise set aside to respect to the permanent funding of the objects or purposes described herein. So to me, what this part of the resolution for the capital project says is, you know what? If you really need to, take a couple cents out of the general fund, but you pay it back. This project is not going to be funded by anything but the capital project approved by the taxpayers. You're not allowed to use general funds for this purpose.
No, and Colleen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the intent of that language and that finance law is to accommodate those breaks in cash flow and borrowing sequence so that, okay, I have a bond, I don't have the cash coming in from the bond yet, but I need to pay the architect or I need to pay the contractor. I'm going to borrow from myself, and then when that bond or financing comes in, I'm paying myself back. And there's time limitations and things like that. And forgive me, I'm not a fiscal advisor by any means, but I work with it a little bit to understand that, yes, you are correct. The intent of any of this work, whether it's the 63.1 capital project or any sub work that goes into that, is not to borrow or take money from the general fund to pay for any of this. It's to allow you that flexibility if you need to borrow it to make ends meet until you get the money reimbursed or backflowed into it to recover it.
That's correct. And if it was specifically in your original bond resolution to specifically come for the general fund, it would have been designated in the proposition itself to come from the general fund.
That's why we have capital reserves. Typically, capital reserves are dedicated for that purpose. But there are some times where you need to have that flexibility to draw from other cash to make it jibe.
Right. So
but pay it back.
So I guess my point is twofold. Number one, we've already bonded against phase 2. We have that money in the bank. So we could use that money as a slush fund rather than the general fund. And number two, the resolution as currently written does not require us to pay back the general fund. It allows us to take money from the general fund without paying it back. As currently written.
Yeah.
Colleen and Nancy, did you want to respond to that? Go ahead.
No, I agree with you on the first part, Jim. We have money right now from the bond proceeds for phase 2 that we can use to fund the remediation project. But I don't think that the resolution, I don't think that the resolution says that we don't have to reimburse any general funds used if there's a cash flow issue.
Well, it doesn't
I
say
don't
we
believe
can't,
that's what it says.
we must.
Pardon me?
And he's asking why it doesn't say that, because we were told that it's in there because it reflected the language that was used initially for the capital project. So if that's the language that was used and that's the justification for putting it in now, that the language should be the same. And we're being told two things. One, we're saying we may need to use the general fund to make ends meet, but we're also being told that's only there in case we need to borrow, but we'll pay it back with the project eventually. It has to be one or the other. If it's both, then there's going to be stronger feelings about that particular part of the resolution.
So Colleen, would you like to share? And Tom, certainly you're welcome to share as well.
Yeah, so the language is the initial assessment, Jim, that you said is the language is in the resolution is for the maximum amount is what's authorized for the 62,000 by the voters back in 2012. But the reason the general fund portion is there is just to provide that flexibility to come in and out when there is those ebbs and flows in either the aid coming in or the bond proceeds coming in. And I know where you are currently in the picture, and I don't know where financially how much money it is now currently in the bond proceeds, but that's going to change over time. And the way the resolution is written is to provide that flexibility. It's not a separate fund that we're designating that the project is going to come from the general fund, but it is one availability that gives the district some flexibility to use some portion of the general fund while waiting for those other sources of revenue to come in.
Tom,
Okay.
you look like you want to share something.
Oh, go ahead.
Tom, go ahead.
Buckle or me?
Buckle. Buckle. Right. It was Buckle. Go ahead. Tom, you're on mute there, boss. You got to unmute yourself.
You got you.
Go ahead.
It was my understanding that, yes, you were trying to be consistent, and I see the gap there clearly. Jim, I think that was a great point. But I also had understood that the state, if not required, to certainly strongly encourage this to assure that there was a source of funds, especially in those sections, and that the risk is, in not doing it this way, the risk is we present everything to the state and they send it back, say it's not good enough. We may not fund, or it doesn't work for us. Colleen, is that, do I read that correctly based on our prior discussions?
Yeah, I mean, we have to set forth to the state our various funding sources when we submit the project, and that it is. The understanding is that the project is going to be funded from that capital project, but it provides that flexibility in there for those circumstances where the general fund has to be used. It has to be authorized when we're waiting for those ebbs and flows of financing to come in, including state aid as well. So that's why it's written that way, and that's the intention, and that's what state aid is going to be looking for. I'm not going to give you a guarantee if we take it out. It's not, whether it's going to get approved or not, but typically that is what the language that we're looking for.
I see Lisa has her hand
But is there a
up.
reason we can't add that?
Yeah, well, I think actually I was just about to say what Heather is asking. So I'm not yet proposing an amendment, but if we were to propose an amendment that appends an additional line that says any monies borrowed from the general fund should be paid back with additional or excess bond funds, that wouldn't make this resolution or make our intent to pay weaker in the eyes of the state education department, would it? I guess maybe that's a question for Colleen.
Yeah, and I'm a little concerned about changing it that way to add that, because I know that provision was added in there by bond counsel, and that was based upon assuring the tax exempt status of those bonds for that particular language. So I'm a little concerned of just taking language from that resolution and just putting it into this. The way the resolution is written now is general enough to provide the flexibility. I don't want to put in language that may not be applicable based upon why that language was put into the original bond proposition, because I think it was put in there to assure the tax exempt status of those bonds.
Would that be any different than the original 2018 capital project? I mean, because that was the language that was originally used to get a new capital project, like we're talking now, to be able to bond things like we're talking now. So I'm not sure why including language in that would be any different. Not that we have to do it on the fly now. I completely agree that if state ed has a particular thing, we take a week or two to figure this out. But, we've already in the original, I wasn't on the board, on the original 2018 capital project, it specifically said, and state ed accepted it as a capital project, that if we borrow money from the general fund, we need to pay it back.
Did I see other questions there? Colleen is working through that. Go ahead, Pam. Pam, go ahead. Go ahead, Pam.
Wait.
There you go.
There, I think I'm on now. Oh my gosh, this thing's crazy. I think we're forgetting this is an emergency project. It's not a separate project. It's a project that's an emergency inside of our capital project. I hear what you're saying, Jim, about, we would like it to be paid back. I'm going to err on the side that we're not even going to tap the general fund. How's that one? But I think we're forgetting this is an emergency. We need to go forward. We need to get the remediation started. We need to have this done before the snow melt in the spring. It's an emergency. I think we're forgetting that word, and time is of the essence. I mean, I don't like spending more money any more than anyone else does. And I know we want to protect ourselves, but yeah, we're pushed into a corner, but it's an emergency.
So in terms of
and Pam, also, my question originally was, have you ever dealt with anything like this before? And your King and King has not. So this is all new.
I would just share with the board that in terms of the general fund and how this is managed, so if there's a concern and we have to go to the general fund, I would be bringing this matter back before the board to have that conversation. We will not touch that general fund unless we really have to do that. We'll come back and talk to you about how much, from where, what, and how. And board, you certainly have oversight, right? You can say yes or no. The reason it's again in there is to provide the flexibility. So when we go to state ed, they're looking for certain types of flexibilities, right? That we're going to try to work from within the capital fund, or that you have that general fund if there's a backup plan, or work with all of your state aid. But it doesn't mean that we're going to hit that general fund. You as the board has financial oversight, and I would be bringing, as long as I'm here, I will come back to the board very openly, very transparently, and share this with you. And the board has the final say with yay or nay, and that will be a priority. I hear you loud and clear. Your concern is around the general fund and making sure we don't just lose money from it. You want to make sure that we keep it to the area that it's at or better. And that's my expectation as well, to the greatest extent possible. But you have financial oversight, Jim and board. We will come back if there's a need to kind of go there beforehand. We certainly will do that. Tom, it looked like you wanted to share something, or Colleen? Are you both good? Tom's saying anything. Colleen, go ahead.
No, I'm good. And again, if there is an expenditure that comes from the general fund, we would specifically, and I agree, Dr. Calvin, that would specifically bring it back to the board for that authorization.
Tom?
Yeah, I'm only going to suggest, from a legal standpoint, I do recommend the greatest possible flexibility here. And the last thing you want, as was suggested, is a delay. And if this works for the state and it helps processes faster, and you remain ultimately in control, then my counsel, again, it's just a second opinion in a sense, is to keep the flexibility and go forward this way, but yet remain in control, as Dr. Calvin said he will do in the future.
Absolutely. Were there other questions at all from the board?
Well, I guess I have one that's just we're off. If we go ahead and authorize this, where is the language in this resolution that does say it's that specific pieces will come back to the board?
So, General, go ahead, Colleen. You want to say something?
So specific pieces with respect to modifying the project scope, or has to come back through pursuant to our discussion that King and King had said with respect to any modifications of the project scope going forward, that'll come back to the board. That wouldn't be specifically in the resolution, because this resolution is only identifying it as an emergency project to get us out of the starting gate, to get the SED to recognize it as an emergency project, so that we can start the process moving. Any changes in the project that have to come back to the board, consistent with any changes at your project ongoing right now, that come back to the board for approval.
Heather, was your question related to the use of the general fund is coming back to the board?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like we are authorizing a broad amount of power and money and authority, and yet I'm hearing everyone say, but don't worry, because the specifics will come back to you. The specifics will come back to you, but we're authorizing in this resolution. It isn't just saying, we're okay with it for you to tell the state that we support this in theory. We're actually authorizing it. So Yeah, I want to, where is the security that the specifics come back to us?
Well, you have your budget transfers that would probably have to be used to clarify those things, which you folks probably do as part of your consent agenda or your evaluations of that. I mean, basically any budget money you have the final say in as part of your board duties. It's similar to the change orders. I mean, you review the change orders, you have a change order log, you get to comment on, question, and you are the final say in how those things proceed based on the precedents you've established throughout the year. So there's really not much that's done financially or even schedule-wise with the capital project or any construction work that the board is not either aware, because we have 2 to 3 members of the board as part of the facilities committee, but also in just the way we communicate through the superintendent and in meetings similar to this, where we provide updates and general opportunities to have discussions in it. I don't feel personally, and this is as a fellow board member in a neighbor district, that the language is giving anyone a blank check on the district without board oversight and board approval. There's nothing in that that says it. I understand Jim's comment about, well, the previous resolution had a little bit tighter language, but I still think it has the same strength and flexibility that this does. Nothing gets past the board financially without board discussion, review, and approval. Fiscal. I mean, it's just been my experience on the budgetary side of things and the approvals of those. Yes, Jim.
So if I may, we break out the crystal ball. We're setting ourselves up for the possibility where Dr. Kelvin comes back to us and says, we need to dip into the general fund. I want to transfer 50, 100,000, whatever the money is. I need to transfer out of the general fund into the capital fund or whichever fund, to do this project. We would then be asked to take the money out of the general fund without any directive of paying it back, without any idea of how that might be reimbursed. So what we're basically doing, by the way the resolution is written now, is saying we'll let a future board decision make that decision at that time.
No, Jim.
You can make that decision,
No, Jim.
but it's still
I'm sorry, go ahead.
you're going to have to spend it. I mean, you're not going to get it back.
Right. No, so we when we go to, if that ever comes up, and I know this is just one out of a thought, right? It comes up, we come and share with the board can say yes, the board has the power to say no, right? The board can have as much discussion about it as they wish to. There is no forcing of the board to do anything, right? Again, this resolution, just offers the flexibility to be able to use other pieces, but it doesn't mean that the board does not have oversight. Also, in terms of your oversight, you have oversight over your superintendent, but you also have oversight over your budget and how your funds are used. And I'm very transparent. I try to be very transparent, share everything up front. I bring everything back to the board, and the board has, as Craig says, you have in every board meeting, you have budget transfers, budget items that have to be approved. That's the way that we would continue in this process. It would not be in any way you're shoved in the corner, you have to do it. I will continue to keep you in the process. I have to share that generally, this is the way that I've talked to a couple superintendents as well, Jim, over the last couple of weeks around how do you handle your emergency projects? And this is not atypical. This is not outside the realm. And boards manage this process as they manage their superintendent, right? They hold him accountable, and we make sure that we're transparent through that. I see Lisa has a question, Jim, but you go ahead and ask your next question, and I saw Lisa's hand there. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, no, I have more of a comment, and it's because this is an extraordinary circumstance. I think we need to be especially careful. And I agree with Pam. This is something that is an emergency situation, which is why when we vote on resolutions like this, we need to be very careful of it. Because let me add one more thought to my, if you need to come to us and say you need $100,000 to do something, it's not something where we can say, oh, you want to hire somebody else? Oh, we want to do this extra. It's We need to remediate something that is an emergency situation. So we're not in a position to tell you no. We're only in a position to tell you where you can get the money from. But if you need the money, we are beholden to you and our community to spend that money. That's the biggest problem with this whole thing, is no matter which way we cut it, we've got to spend money. So if we're opening up the general fund without the ability to pay it back, you come to us and say we need the general fund. Honestly, if we vote yes now, we can't vote no later. We need to give you the money because it's an emergency situation.
No, you can vote no on anything. You have final over. I have to disagree with you respectfully. You have final oversight as the board, and you do have the right to vote no on any item that comes before the board that you feel
we've got to remediate. We can't not clean it up, I guess is my point.
I hear you. I do, but you still have final say as to how we go about doing that. And I would certainly make sure that the board did have that say. I saw Lisa. Lisa, did you have a question? I'm sorry.
I did, but Tom Chappa's hand was up before mine was.
Oh, Tom, I'm sorry.
No, I just want to say, yeah, there's nothing that precludes us for when it comes to the board to saying, yes, with the caveat, you can have the money, but we want to pay it back at that point. Can't we do the language then? We're just not putting it in here, but we're going to put it in there. And I believe as a board, because we are all so connected to this project, that and looking at it very stringently, that we will do that. That we'll have the faith that we will, look at this, and because I don't want this to affect any of the educational components down the line. I know I voiced that earlier with Craig, and we'll do our due diligence to make sure that this money is looked at the project and get it where we can from future phases or change the scope, but that none of us want to go into general fund, and we have the ability and capability to say yes with the caveat that it will be paid back.
And a really great thing that yes, Tom, and one of the great things that you all have as a board that other districts may not have, you've got 3 members on your capital construction committee, and every single week we meet and talk. That's a bit more than some others do. And so you have oversight there, and then we bring it back to a whole board meeting every 2 weeks. So you've got a lot of foreign ability as a board to manage this process. Lisa, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, Tom made my point.
Great. Okay, are there any other questions from the board? Okay, I'm all set. You're on mute, Karen.
You're muted.
I'll now call roll call. Kathleen Allen. I don't know if her mic is working yet.
She raised her hand, yes.
Thank you. Tom Chappa.
Yes.
Heather Del Conte.
Yes.
Pamela Dowd.
Yes.
Lisa Glidden.
Yes.
Jim McKenzie.
No.
And Linda Serino.
Yes.
The resolution has passed 6-1. We'll now move to the consent agenda. Minutes of the regular board meeting of November 17, 2020. Special Education Board Report, December 1st, 2020. District Financial Report, 7/1 to 9/30, 2020. District Financial Report, 7/1 to 10/31, 2020. Monthly Budget Status Report, October 2020. And the Treasurer's Report, October 2020. Could I have a motion?
Move it.
Second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And Dr. Calvin, do we want to excuse our guests?
Yes, I was just going to say that. Thanks. We're on the same
As
line
interesting as
there.
this is.
Yes, thank you for coming. Thank you.
And opposed?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes.
And opposed? Thank you. Next is the Board of Education proposed board policies. That the Board of Education review and approve the first reading of board policies listed below, and that the policies will be placed on the December 15th, 2020 Board of Education meeting agenda for the second reading and final approval. These were brought to the Board of Education Policy Committee on November 17th, and they did approve to move them to tonight's meeting for the first reading. If I could have a motion?
Move it.
Second?
Second it.
Any discussion?
I just was curious, how many of these were brought with the policy committee were brought to us from outside and recommendations that we needed to, or how many were internal with that?
I believe all of them came. With
All came from the outside?
Yes.
Okay, and just my question, was there any regarding the sexual harassment policy in terms of removing the portion regarding posting of that information? Was that that part of the recommendations, I'm assuming?
Heidi, you want to do that one, Heidi?
Yep. So, Tom, the law changed a number of times in pretty rapid succession for New York State. So when you look at the policy update, they had taken some of the information and moved it to later in the policy. So that green struck area, it's not that they removed it, but put it later. We do still post as required by the law. I send it out annually, both written, and I ask folks to post it on their main office bulletin boards or their department bulletin boards. And we also do an annual training for all employees on sexual harassment.
Gotcha. I knew about that. I just saw the posting and it jumped out at me in terms of the removal of that.
Of course.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next is personnel with Dr. Sweeney.
Okay. A, we have a regular sub appointment, Carolyn Ahart at Layton School. You will see a number of extensions of leaves of absences as well as replacements. According to the Families First Coronavirus Act, folks were allowed to take a period of time off. Those were the leaves of absence that I brought to you throughout the summer and into September. And as people are making decisions about whether or not to extend those leaves, we are filling or keeping the person who's in the position for the remainder of the year. So that's our first one, Carolyn Ahart as a TA. B, we have extra compensatory recommendation. We discussed this at the last meeting for the 2 low-risk sports that we had talked about for winter, varsity boys and girls bowling and varsity boys swimming and diving. And those are A and B for the professional recommendations.
Resolutions A and B, if I could get a motion, please.
Move it.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
And for our provisional appointments, C, support staff recommendation, Tim Wizarek, who's a computer AV repair technician. This again is filling and replacing some of the movements we've seen in technology as folks are retiring. D, extra compensatory recommendation. As our COVID coordinator, Christina Chamberlain has really just done an above and beyond job that is extended into all sorts of nighttime hours and weekend hours. Quite a bit more than we initially anticipated back in July and August when we were coming up with some of the planning that was required. So in discussions with Dr. Calvin, the unit members, and Christina, we have determined that she is definitely worthy of an additional stipend. This will be covered under a memorandum of agreement. It will only encompass this current school year and because of the COVID pandemic. So we're not necessarily setting any sort of precedent, but that is that COVID-19 coordinator stipend. And then we have E, 1 substitute teacher appointment.
Resolution C, D, and E, could I have a motion?
Move it.
Second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
I would just like to thank Christina Chamberlain
I just want to thank
because she has just gone 10,000 miles over.
She-
And it would have been extremely difficult, I think, for this district to proceed without everything that Christina has put forth. Thank you, Christina. I wish we could
Yeah.
give you more money.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next is finance with Nancy Squires.
A is the budget transfer from gasoline to equipment repair. This, at the last board meeting, I brought a resolution forward to do a transfer so that we could rent a lift. This is to have 2 of our lifts repaired so that we don't have to continue to rent a lift. And that is in the amount of $23,829.71. B is an MOU with Oswego County Opportunities. This is for a virtual after-school programming for Fitzhugh Park and Layton schools. And this is no cost to the district. They had some funds left over from last year that they're going to be using for this year. C is a contract with New York State Coalition for Independent and Religious Schools. This is for Title IIA and Title IV funding for Trinity Catholic School. Title IIA, they're getting $6,036. Title IV, they're getting $2,881. And we act as the flow-through for the private schools. D is the proposal that the National Junior Honor Society establish a Jack R. Bobbitt Memorial Scholarship. And E is a contract with CT Mail for a survey of Layton School for $2,100.
Resolution A through, could I have a motion?
Move it.
Second?
I'll second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next is student representative discussion. Zeta?
Nothing from me tonight. No.
Okay. Next is items from the board. Did any of the board members have any items tonight?
I just wanted to ask something. I know we're in the maelstrom of everything that's coming at us from COVID and everything, and now this with the remediation and the capital project and everything. But I was wondering as we go along, and at some point, I just thought this would be the time to bring it out. If we can, if Mathis, if we could bring things forward, so look at the education component. And even though I know we're being so challenged, you know, just by keeping kids in school and do it, but where we are, how we're doing, you know, and just give some benchmarks so that we can look at, so we can just get an adjustment as we go along. Because I know, and this is for the public as well, we're in a crazy time with so much going on, but we don't want to lose sight of that component, and we want to be able to bring that forward and let them know that that's not out of sight and out of mind. It's always moving forward, and just to bring that forward to the public.
Absolutely. We can do that at our next board meeting.
Okay.
With the board, if the board okay with that, okay, great. We'll do. Thank you, Tom.
Right.
Any other items? Would there be a need for an executive session?
Yes.
Reason?
Yes, to discuss the particular performance of a staff member, items that could imperil the community, and contract negotiations, please.
Can I have a motion?
To move it.
Second?
I'll second.
Would there be a need for a vote after executive session?
No, I wouldn't.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Are we using the last link, the link that we used previously?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you.
You may move to executive session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye.
Bye,
Bye.
Karen.
Karen, we're going to stop recording here.
Yes, please.
All right. Have a